What's up, everybody? Nate here, and we just got the most recent CPI numbers for inflation for July 2022, and good news, inflation did come down for the entire month. It actually was only 8.5%, down from around 9.1% in June of this year. Now, you're probably looking at the title of this video and thinking, hyperinflation, how can that seriously be a problem in 2022 if inflation is starting to come down? Well, the truth is, inflation is not starting to come down. Generally, we saw certain things come down in July 2022, but most experts and investors believe that this is not going to continue throughout the rest of this year. So I want to talk about inflation, I want to break down this report, and I want to talk about what you need to do with your money right now in order to protect yourself against inflation. All right, so like I said, in the United States, inflation is now generally 8.5%. Now, the way that we measure that is from something called the CPI, or the Consumer Price Index. This basically takes a basket of all goods and services every single month and measures how their prices are going up or if their prices are going down. Lately, over the last 2 years, inflation, which is what the CPI measures, has gone way up. So average prices in the United States have gone way up, and 8.5% means that year over year, prices in general throughout the United States have gone up. This is the second time that we've seen CPI or inflation actually decrease in our economy in 2022. The last time was from April to May, where we saw the 8.5% inflation numbers then go down to 8.3. Now they went down from 9.1 to 8.5, and this looks like a great thing for our economy, and it shows that the Federal Reserve and the United States federal government is finally starting to do something about inflation and that our economy might be moving in the right direction. But what brought inflation down back then is now what is starting to bring down the general inflation numbers in July 2022. Now, the big thing that brought down inflation numbers in July 2022 was energy. Energy costs actually decreased by around 4.6%, and gasoline, the biggest part of that, decreased by 7.7%. As of recording this video, the average price of a gallon of gas is below $4 once again. Gas prices have been coming down for the last 2 months or so. So with energy costs holding such a large portion, around 30% of the Consumer Price Index, that shows that inflation generally is coming down. This means that most Americans are saving a little bit of money on gas, and that prices for everything related to gas and energy are going to start coming down as well. Core inflation actually did decrease as well, which is what the Federal Reserve likes to use when it measures inflation in our economy. It went from around 6.1% to 5.9%. So in general, things are starting to pull back a little bit in our economy. But I said at the beginning of this video that this is a big fake out from inflation, and that these big inflation numbers are kind of a lie. Inflation is still a big problem in our economy because food and shelter costs are rising. Shelter costs went up by 0.5% and food costs went up by 1.1%. Food costs, though, are not included in that core inflation number. Core inflation measures all of our goods and services minus energy and food, because those are very volatile industries, and the Federal Reserve doesn't really have a lot of control over the demand of them. So they like to keep that out of their metrics because it can kind of throw off how they're going to raise interest rates and set their monetary policy. So Americans are still paying more for shelter and food and a slew of other things in this economy. But the other big issue is that we're not sure if inflation is going to pick up later this year. We don't know if gas prices and energy prices are going to get worse, because a lot of our energy and our problems with that are being caused by other factors. Gas prices in general came down over the last few months for a variety of different reasons. For one, we started to increase supply. OPEC was bringing out billions of more barrels of oil every single month because there was a demand for it, when over the last 2 years we didn't have the demand, and it was really difficult to just start that up. It takes months to produce this oil, and we're finally starting to see all of this oil that was produced months ago. Not only that, but Russia is still producing oil, and even though that oil isn't coming to the United States, it's going to other parts throughout the world. They are still giving oil to India and China, and with those two countries still getting a lot of oil and powering their supply ships and supply chains, then that means that they have a lot of oil to use. China and India are big economies, and if they don't get any oil from Russia, then they have to get it from elsewhere, really hurting the supply. But so far, we haven't really seen that, meaning that all of the sanctions that the United States and and Europe are starting to put on Russia, well, that hasn't really worked. But it's also not a terrible thing for the United States because energy prices are still pretty decent despite everything that we've done. Not only that, but oil companies are trying to be very careful with how much oil they produce. They are starting to look at if the United States is going to head into a recession. They're starting to look at consumer spending habits because they don't want to overproduce a bunch of oil because then you have to basically give it away for free. This is something that happened in the early parts of the pandemic back in 2020. We saw oil companies literally giving out oil for negative prices. They were literally giving it away for free. Not only that, but they were literally paying people to take it off of their hands because they have all of this oil and they have to get rid of it. So oil companies want to avoid that in 2022. They don't want to try to overproduce way too much oil because then they're just going to have to give it away. So they are starting to produce just enough in order to meet demand. And then finally, we also have really solid weather in the Gulf Coast in the United States. In 2020 and in 2021, we had a ton of weather disasters that took out oil refineries. And this year we haven't had as many, meaning that we've been able to produce a lot more oil. So oil is starting to come down in price all throughout the country, but we're not sure if it's going to stay that way. With prices coming down, that could mean that demand starts to go way up, and oil companies aren't really prepared for that. In addition, we don't know what's going to happen with Europe and Russia and where Russia is going to send a lot of its oil to. If China and India start not taking oil from Russia, then that could mean that the price here at home gets a lot more expensive. And Europe is pretty much set on eliminating Russian oil from its supply chains by the end of this year. Not only that, but if we start to see consumer trends slow down, then gas companies are not going to overproduce oil. They're actually going to underproduce it because they don't feel like a lot of Americans are going to be able to afford it. That in the short term could mean a big spike in gas prices until we kind of hit that equilibrium of supply and demand. Speaking of which, consumers really control our economy. Depending on how consumers decide to spend their money, that is going to determine what prices are for a lot of things. That's what happened over the last 2 years and why we're facing this inflation problem in the first place. There was a ton of government stimulus and forbearance programs, and the Federal Reserve lowered their benchmark interest rates to 0%. So a lot of Americans went out and spent a ton of money. That meant that demand went through the roof for all of the things they were buying, like food and of course energy and mortgages. Those things got a lot more expensive, but now all of that has pretty much ended. Forbearance for pretty much everything minus student loans has pretty much ended. Stimulus is gone, and now everything is getting a whole lot more expensive. Demand is starting to come down, but prices just go way back up. This has been a really good report for our entire economy, but if consumers believe that they can go out and spend again because our supply chains are getting better, the war between Russia and Ukraine is getting better, energy costs are going down, and we're not going into a recession, well, then that could cause a lot of Americans to overspend right now, which is a big problem because that's just going to send demand through the roof when we don't have the supply for it. Businesses are really hurting right now because they're not getting enough sales, but they also have a lot of employees that are being overpaid because of the Great Resignation. A lot of businesses hired a ton of people over the last couple of years, but they've realized that a lot of the people that they hired, well, they overpaid them. They pretty much had to though, because that was the incentive. The employees had all of the power in that relationship. So in order to get a new job, in order for businesses to attract people, they had to give them better benefits. They had to give them better work-life balance, and they had to give them better pay. All of these companies are now trying to figure out how to make a profit, and one of the things that they're doing is cutting their costs, i.e. cutting their people. So it basically works like this. Americans are feeling really good right now, so they might go out and start traveling for the rest of August and into September. They might start buying a lot more gas. They might start buying a whole lot more things because they believe we're not going into a recession. How could we? Inflation is starting to come down. Our economy is in a really good place, but but then they lose their job because a lot of these businesses don't have the money to pay for them. Meanwhile, all of that has already been done. So with people buying more right now, with people going out and traveling more right now, energy costs are going to go up because oil companies have to produce more oil. Businesses have to produce more, but they don't have the money to do so, so they are going to raise their prices. And if people buy a lot right now, they believe that they can raise their prices because obviously people can afford what they're buying and they don't really have that much supply. So let's make more supply, make it more expensive so we can try to meet that equilibrium. That could mean that in the month of September and October and throughout the rest of this year, inflation just goes right back up. Except for this time, Americans are a lot more in debt and they don't have the money in order to buy all of the same things that they did before. Not only that, but inflation is 8.5% right now. So in order to beat inflation at your job, you need to have a raise of around 10, 11, and 12%. Most Americans are not going to get that in 2022, meaning inflation is going to go up, but your wages are not. It might be okay right now because sure, you might have gotten a similar amount of raise in comparison to inflation, but you're not actually beating it. So every dollar that you're spending is actually worth less. So that is my worry about inflation, that it could go into hyperdrive over the next few months because Americans have a lot of confidence to go out and spend. They believe like they're going to have a good job, they're going to be able to get more money, and everything is going to get a whole lot cheaper once again. You gotta remember though, prices are not going to come back down. You just have to make more money. So what you need to do with your money in 2022 is to take it and basically do nothing. Inflation is most likely going to go back up, and keep in mind that 8.5% with inflation, while that is a really good thing that it started to come down generally, not everything is coming down. 8.5% is just the large number, but inflation is still deeply entrenched in our economy because food and shelter costs and a slew of other things are still going up in our economy. Now, I'm not saying you can't go out and spend your money. What I'm saying is you have to be a little bit more careful because we don't know which direction inflation is going to go. Chances are the Federal Reserve is still going to aggressively raise its interest rates, which means demand is going to come down. People are going to have a lot harder time investing in businesses or starting businesses or getting a mortgage or an auto loan. Right now, you may have the money for it, but in a couple months, you might not because of layoffs or unemployment or the cost of everything else going up. And people have to eat. People have to be able to pay their water bill and, of course, their shelter costs. If they don't, then they're going to be out on the street. And that's a terrible situation, but a lot of Americans might be pushing themselves way too thin right now because they have that FOMO. They don't want to miss out on taking that last-minute vacation or buying that car or getting a mortgage because our entire economy could flip in the future. They want to take it while they can because inflation looks like it's coming down. What I'm saying is you have to be careful. If you have a really strong savings fund that is $3,000 plus in the bank, well, then that's great, but you also need to have a well-diversified investment portfolio so that way you can protect yourself and actually start to beat inflation in 2022. If you have those things really solidly set up, then just try to spend within your means. That way you're not overexerting yourself, and if we have problems down the road, you are well prepared. Because inflation is not going anywhere, and if we pretend that it's gone and that it's disappeared in 2022, well, then a lot of Americans are going to make a big financial mistake. They're going to get into a lot of debt. They're going to be way in over their head financially, and they're not going to have the money to support themselves down the road, and now they're in a really bad situation. The Federal Reserve may look at this number as a winning point in their monetary policy and decide to stimulate the economy and lower interest rates and print a bunch of money by the end of this year, which is only going to make inflation go up faster. And it really just depends on if we're in a recession or not. So like I said, when it comes to this latest inflation report, we're definitely headed in the right direction, but this is where financial education comes in key. Because I don't know what's going to happen next with our economy. Everything could be great or it could absolutely go down the drain. But doing the right things with your money right now is is going to mean the difference between you paying your mortgage and getting your groceries or losing everything. And what's the worst that can happen? You prepare and nothing bad happens, and now you have all of this extra money that you can spend however you want to. That's why in all financial situations, you need to try to prepare for the good and for the bad. Hopefully the bad doesn't happen, but we just don't know. But now I want to hear from you on this issue. What do you think about the latest inflation numbers? Do you think that inflation is finally starting to come down in our economy, or do you think this is a big fake out? Inflation has gone down a little bit, but it's just going to go back up later on this year. Whatever your thoughts are, leave a comment below before you go. But that is it for today's business and financial news breakdown. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to stay up to date with all the top business and financial news from around the country, our team puts together a free daily newsletter, and you can subscribe to it by clicking the link in this corner right here. And if you want to stay up to date with me and everything else happening in the business and financial world, I'm putting out updates 7 days a week over here on this channel, and I've actually got another one ready for you right here, so be sure to check that out before you go. That is it for me, everybody. Be kind out there, and I'll see you all in the next one.